Let's start with North America and really U.S., just so because you guys are global and you can address so much. We've heard from many restaurant chains, large and small, about traffic down 50, 90, 100% in the past couple of weeks. I know Q1's not out, but can you give us a sense of what's open right now and what can stay open at this level of demand?
Sure, Carl. Well, we're truly in extraordinary times right now. The great thing about our U.S. business, we have the vast majority of our U.S. restaurants are open. 14,000 restaurants in the U.S. We only have 50 closed. And the fact that the majority of our business comes through drive-through, delivery, and takeaway, we are better set up than most in terms of being able to continue to operate in what is certainly a very trying time.
So 50 closed. And are there circumstances that those 50 have in common right now? And how big could that number get?
Yeah, usually what's happening with the 50 that are closed, it's when an entire building might get closed. So, for example, here in Chicago, Navy Pier, which is where we have a Chicago McDonald's restaurant, all of Navy Pier is closed. And so for that reason, the restaurant is closed. So that typically is the situation when we have a restaurant closed.
All right. Do you fear that number getting much larger, or given your control of both company-owned and franchisee operations, that number, that incredibly low number, by the way, can stay pretty stable?
Well, I think in this time right now, really our ability to serve communities, to deliver food is pretty critical. Even in states or cities that have had shutdowns, McDonald's and others like us have been deemed as essential businesses. People still need food. They still need to be able to get it in a safe, clean environment. So I'm very optimistic that we're going to continue to see governments asking us to remain open.
As far as franchisee assistance goes, Chris, what kinds of things can and are you doing in terms of rent, if applicable, helping them seek liquidity, forgiveness if they do get in trouble? And how do you balance that kind of support for your franchisees with the shareholder obligations that you obviously have?
Yep, a really important question. And I think one of the things that for me is so remarkable is to see how our system comes together in a situation like this to make sure that we all chip in and assist one another. So in the case of our franchisees, we have lenders working with our franchisees around restructuring loan payments. We have our suppliers who are extending payment terms. And then we are stepping in situations as a company and offering them both service fee, which is essentially a royalty, as well as rent deferrals. For us, a unique thing about our business is we typically charge rent as a % of sales. And so unlike maybe a normal business that's paying a fixed amount, our rent also goes down as any sales goes down. So we're all really chipping in, and it's incredibly important for us to keep our franchisees viable and open through all of this so they can serve the communities. I think your point about balancing that with shareholders is an important one as well. Fortunately for us, we came into this crisis with really fantastic performance. Our last 3 years, I think we were probably the top performing company in the industry. We have the best balance sheet in the industry, and so we feel confident about our ability to both make sure our system can continue to function and also make sure that we fulfill our obligations to shareholders.
Food supply chain, suppliers, any disruptions, and would you expect disruptions now that we're beginning to see some cross-border limitations on travel, Canadian ag, anything like that?
Yeah, the remarkable thing, we have 40,000 restaurants globally. We have not had one single instance of a supply break anywhere in the world, which is really, for me, a mind-boggling accomplishment. Credit to our system for that. As to whether that happens going forward, I think we're going to have to see. But so far, we have not had a single supply break globally.
Interesting. Does McDonald's, as a company, need government assistance? And what kind of assistance would you be arguing for right now for the restaurant industry?
Well, I think the important thing to recognize about the restaurant industry, not just McDonald's, is it's really a small business industry. And it's not just a small business in the U.S., industry in the U.S., but globally. The restaurant industry is about small businesses. And so I think, you've heard over the last couple of weeks a lot of different discussion about how to support small businesses. I would say the number one thing that we need from governments, not just in the U.S., but around the world right now, is let's stop this pandemic. And I think once we do that, the sooner we can do that, we can talk about everything else. But job one right now is to stop the pandemic.
So and they've been framed in different kinds of words, but the actions taken in California yesterday, New York State today, Illinois, by the way, your home state as a company today, you would be in favor of those from a corporate standpoint?
Well, I think what we're seeing is, we need to make sure we stop the pandemic. At the same time, McDonald's has a role to play, which is why the governments have asked us to continue to remain open. People still need to be able to get food. And so I think government needs to take the appropriate actions. But I think importantly, for our restaurants to stay open, it's important for the communities that we do that.
Chris, you went to Harvard Business School where they do a lot of case studies, and I got to tell you, the shift of in-home spend on food going from restaurants to grocery in the last few weeks is going to be a case study for years to come. How much is delivery for you now? You had already put in so much of this, delivery, mobile order, curbside. Where was delivery a month ago, and where do you expect it to get to?
Yeah, you're right, Carl. We've been on this journey for the last several years. We've made significant investments in our restaurants around digital as well as delivery. Delivery for us globally is a $5 billion business growing at about 20%. I would tell you, no surprise that through this crisis, we're seeing our delivery sales become even more pronounced. And so I think, as we look at our experience in China, as we look at our experience in South Korea, that are probably a little bit further along in working through this crisis. One of the things that we've seen in both of those instances is delivery sustains at a significantly higher level post the crisis than pre the crisis. And we're planning appropriately as we think about the ramifications for how this might play out in the rest of the countries around the world.
That's interesting. All right. So since you got to those two countries, can you talk about percentage of restaurants that are open there now? And can Americans have some faith that the United States is going to follow a Chinese or South Korean kind of trajectory when it comes to new cases and then eventually business operations?
Sure. Well, in China, we now have essentially, I think it's about 95% of our restaurants are open. That's about 160 or so that are still closed. I think, we can be confident that if we all take the actions, the collective actions that have been asked of us around social distancing, working from home, we absolutely have the ability to stop this virus and get to the other side of this. I think what we also are seeing, though, in China and South Korea is this is not a V-shaped recovery. This is a gradual recovery that comes afterward. And so I think for us to start to also think about how do we, really aid and enable that recovery, because, this is a deep trough for us, no doubt.
How do you has anything about the Italian experience of all of this been informed through the metrics that you see? Why does it seem so bad there? And I guess what do operations look like right now in Italy?
Well, you're right in that I think Italy is probably one of the most concerning and alarming situations out there. In the case of Italy, the business really is on full lockdown, and I think it just underscores the importance of getting ahead of this while we still have time, while we can still really flatten the curve, as I think we've all learned that expression. So I think, there's a lesson to be learned from Italy, which is essentially how serious this is and how important it is that we move quickly to address it.
This is still CNBC, Chris. I'm sure you understand. I got to have a requisite question about buybacks, which is now
Yes,
even a topic of discussion with the president, dividends, and the dollar. How much of that is going to be a focus when you print Q1?
Sure. Well, actually, on the buybacks, I think it's a very fair question. We actually had suspended buybacks several weeks ago, really for us, we just wanted to maintain maximum flexibility as we went into this crisis and be able to be nimble as we needed to. So we've actually stopped buybacks several weeks ago. In terms of how to think about the dollar, we don't really manage the business in terms of short-term currency fluctuations. Obviously, right now, the dollar's quite strong. If that were to stay something for a prolonged period of time, we might think about things a little bit differently. But right now, we don't really spend a lot of time just looking to the ups and downs of currency fluctuation. And then in terms of the dividend, dividend for us is a paramount priority, and so there's no changes planned for that.
Finally, Chris, how do you think the dine-in experience changes on the other side of all of this? I mean, we see pictures of people getting their temperature taken as they go into a fast food restaurant in China. I guess operationally, for the long term, how is that going to look?
Yeah. I think it's a great question. You're right, Carl, in what you're pointing out. The consumer psychology in China and South Korea has changed as a result of not just this crisis, but they've been through epidemics before, and none of them, I think, as pronounced as this one. And you do see, people are a little bit more leery about being around other people, whether it's dine-in. You're seeing use of public transportation, even post the crisis in some of those countries, is down. And so, whether those experiences actually translate to every other country, I think time will tell. But we're certainly paying a lot of attention to how consumer psychology changes post the crisis so that we can respond appropriately.
Well, Chris, few companies have the kinds of radars that you do at McDonald's. We really appreciate you sharing it with our viewers today. The best to all of you. Thank you.
Sure thing.